Once again, you have placed in context exactly where the region is and the issues facing us, and expressed the deep disappointment of many of us who were at the Grand Dance meeting and are amazed at where we are 23 years later. What I will say, first of all, is to apologize also for the Honorable Prime Minister Patterson, who's former Prime Minister of Jamaica. He was to be here with us, and he had agreed to give a keynote address as well. However, on trying to book him, we discovered that there is no longer a direct flight from Jamaica to Barbados on Tuesdays and Thursdays. And therefore, one has to overnight in Miami at midnight and get up in time to catch a 6 o'clock flight to get here in the morning. I did not want to put him through that. I didn't think that he needed to be put through that. But I think it reflects once again where the region is going, and I think it is extremely unfortunate. The two ministers who came in last night had to go through Miami, so they had to fly 3 hours north to get south. At any rate, I just wanted to mention that we are short for time, so let me just ask the Honorable Ryan Pinder to give his presentation.
Do you mind if I do
No,
that?
please.
Good morning. Excellent presentation, excellent presentation. And just so to put a little context to that, we heard that Time for Action was in 1992. I was just graduating high school in 1992. To my colleague panelists, those representing CARICOM here as well, my colleague ministers here today, and certainly to Pamela Coke Hamilton, Executive Director of Caribbean Export Development Agency, and other SEDA executives, members of the Diplomatic Corps, I say good morning to you today. Certainly, I would hope that the local Bajan, I think you say it was a food distributor at the conclusion, would likewise see Bahamians as just people as well. First, let me say how pleased I am to be here in beautiful Barbados. I look out on the balcony from my room, and it reminds me of the Bahamas. Looking at the ocean further reminds me how much we, as members of the Caribbean, whether it be as far north as the Bahamas, all the way down south, share in common. We have great similarities, which extend beyond geography. We have shared histories, progressively integrating common purposes, and I think we all have a hope for a vibrant future. I want to congratulate the Executive Director of SEDA and other executives for contributing and forming this panel discussion for us to come together and really not present but discuss the way forward for the region. The dialogue today that we're speaking about, where we are today, in the context of being countries exporting from our region, is of particular interest at this time. During this 5th year of many of our countries having signed the Economic Partnership Agreement with the European Union, and indeed between ourselves as members of CARIFORUM, and the obligation which this brings for us to account during this year of our efforts to implement the EPA. And more importantly, I believe, on what benefit the EPA has brought or will bring our respective countries. Today we speak about regional integration on the panel and the effectiveness of its implementation. And regional integration in the context of the Caribbean has many facets. These include economic, diplomatic, educational, and certainly the effects on society and culture. I am personally of the view that in order to claim success at a regional integration, and in order for our people in the region to benefit and appreciate regional integration, we must be successful at economic regional integration. Without the creation of opportunities for our people on an economic basis, meaning employment, meaning the ability to build careers, entrepreneurial opportunities, and business expansions, regional integration cannot succeed. Regional integration in the Caribbean, in the economic sense, has been almost exclusively based on the concept of intra-regional trade, which many have opined throughout the region and globally that it has had questionable success. It has been argued that the intra-regional trade policy has caused competing member countries to have increased vulnerability in certain products. It has also been argued that the focus of intra-regional trade has caused undue strain on government resources, and that there has been a breakdown between economic practice and economic theory. The numbers on intra-regional trade also tell this story. Net of oil trade, intra-regional exports have not even accounted for 10% of total CARICOM trade. And future growth in trade is expected to come from exchange outside of CARICOM. Intra-regional trade has been challenged by a high dependence on foreign markets for industrial inputs into goods and historical colonial heritage that has caused our countries throughout the Caribbean to develop as an economic complement historically to our European counterparts. Despite the challenges experienced as a region, I believe regional integration can succeed, that it can provide the economic opportunities for our people. I personally believe the success of regional integration lies in the ability for us to leverage our respective assets and leverage our respective expertise as countries to develop a regional trade for global export, not exclusively for intra-regional purposes. Some say we are poorly positioned as individual nations for global trade competition. However, in the same breath, they have argued that we are properly positioned for success in value-added goods trade and services, a trend in global trade that is increasing. The Director General of the World Trade Organization recently identified that, and I quote, "Today, almost 60% of trade in goods is intermediates or trade in tasks. Around 40% of the world exports are, in fact, imported inputs. These inputs are to be used to create other products. Global trends do not seem supportive of a traditional industry concept of manufacturing a product from the ground up. It is in this latter context, which I proffer today, that we, one, strongly pursue a model of regional trade integration through production based on a value chain trade policy. Two, we do this in the context and using as the foundation Article 238 on regional preferences in the Economic Partnership Agreement. And thirdly, we reap the benefits of increased exports collectively as a region or as a group of countries. I am cognizant that I sit on a panel with preeminent minds in our jurisdiction, particularly as regards to matters of integration, economically as well as trade. However, I also believe that there are significant gains to be had by this value chain trade model. For success, we must ensure that the production structures and logistic structures of the region are linked together. Regional integration from an economic sense can lie in the liking of our countries from a production basis to further a value chain trade agenda for export outside of our region, as shift in concentration from solely an intra-regional trade approach. This value-added trade strategy, often referred to as value chain trade, seeks to increase the value of a product at each point on a chain of production. Such points may occur in different islands, different countries, and different jurisdictions. It maximizes both the utilization of trade in goods and trade in services, historically where we have seen growth in the Caribbean region. And it does not require each of our countries to be responsible for producing an item from the ground up and then exporting that item. It allows us to specialize on one component of production, add value, export regionally, with the goal of an ultimate export of a finished product to markets outside of our region. This approach encourages the development of new interlinked industries between our countries. I have been in discussions recently with ministers of trade within the region on building ties and strengthening trade between ourselves, utilizing this strategy. And in each instance, the focus has been on what expertise of each country is, whether it be agriculture, raw materials for refinement, logistics, or ease of access to international markets. Every single country in the region has an opportunity to bring something to the table, to create a product for eventual export. Working together for the overall success of international trade, building successful, sustainable, and effective regional integration one step at a time. The value-added trade strategy, creating a production value chain, is premised on preferential trade between ourselves, and then ultimately international market access. A number of potential mechanisms exist by which to effect this. There's a CSME amongst some CARICOM countries. There's a CARICOM-DR free trade agreement amongst fewer CARICOM countries and the Dominican Republic. And then there's the provision for regional preferences pursuant to the EPA. The challenge has been the fact of the existence of these multiple schemes. The Bahamas is of the view that it has taken monumental steps towards economic integration when it acceded to the Economic Partnership Agreement between CARIFORUM and the European Union. The new government of the Bahamas, having been elected just this past May, has signaled its commitment regionally and internationally to fulfilling its obligations under the EPA by finalizing steps to ensure that our commitments in trade and services and investments were duly incorporated within the EPA. I mention this only to point out the government's readiness to implement the EPA in all its forms, in particular as regards to provision of regional preferences between CARIFORUM countries. We proffer that Article 238 of the EPA be used to garner immediate gains, which might be had from regional preferential trade in developing a platform for value-added trade, successful international exports, and ultimately successful economic regional integration. The advancement of international exports utilizing inter-regional trade to support the end result, and the successes to the respective countries as a result, causes success in intra-regional integration. It might occur systematically instead of all at once. However, it will be achieved on finite successes. And most importantly, the expansion of our respective narrow economies throughout the region, providing additional opportunities for our people. We in the region have a basis for global expertise and likewise can serve as a basis for economic trade success, but also serve as the foundation for regional integration from a social and a cultural point of view. In the context of regional integration, we can learn a lot from the youth of our region. Young people under the age of 30 comprise 60% of the region's citizenry. The youth of CARICOM in a 2010 report observed that the rich cultural diversity is to be our region's greatest resilience. The young people in the same report likewise observed that sports and culture are two areas in which the youth has contributed to a regional identity internationally, for which they need to be recognized. The role of sports is enhancing economic development and social cohesion, but it is yet to be realized to its fullest in the Caribbean. which many observe has the natural advantage in outstanding talent of its youth. In fact, in the coming weeks, the Bahamas will host events under the Caribbean Free Trade Association, better known as CARIFTA, uniquely by name connecting the concept of trade in the region to sports. Sports remains a common bond, an example of true regional integration. It is the great equalizer in the Caribbean. We have an opportunity to transform the success of regional integration of sports into economic opportunities, especially for the youth through the region. Culture and the creative industries is another success in regional integration, especially identifiable with our youth. Young people identify strongly with the many cultural expressions that have distinguished the region internationally, including literary artists, music and dance, art and craft, and music and art festivals. These embodying the creative industries is the fastest growing section in the global marketplace, is evidence of future success for regional integration. Properly supported, this creative industries can be a dominant export market for the region, and is an area where the youth of our region make up the backbone. We as countries in the region must embrace the promotion and economic development of the creative industries in order to realize economic success and benefits and opportunities for our people, and particularly the youth that can come about through regional integration. Youth unemployment in the region are among the highest in the world. We must advance our youth as we look for strategies and policies to demonstrate and affect economic benefits from regional integration. These lie, in my opinion, but providing the economic frameworks to sports, culture, and the creative industries. Before I conclude, I want to give one more example of success in the region on regional integration, and that's diplomacy. Many a time, almost all the time, the countries of the region represent themselves in diplomatic circles as one. Proper regional integration at the diplomatic level. However, we must caution ourselves that our strength on that success of regional integration is not watered down by many of the international institutions that are popping up. We are members of the ACP, the OAS, now we have CELAC, and what else may come in the future. We must guard against this one of the strongest accomplishments in regional integration being diluted and watered down in the international community. This, I think, is one of our challenges going forward, to preserve the successes of regional integration that we have achieved, and ultimately transform those successes into economic viability. There have been successes, and there have been challenges when it comes to regional integration. In order for those of us elected or appointed to serve our respective nationals and Caribbean people more generally, in pursuit of all objectives, we have to proceed with a mindset of providing the best and the most sustainable opportunities for our people's advancement. In certain instances, this requires adjusting to global environments, rebuilding on strategies established, and implementing new strategies. Regional integration is of fundamental importance to the Caribbean in all sense of the term. Economic regional integration, historically some say challenged, must succeed. It must cause for the advancement of our respective citizens. We as a region must cause for strategies to adapt and to adjust, especially in the context of trade, to ensure that we as a region get to the forefront of the international paradigm, to cause on a regionally integrated fashion the lifting up of all of our respective countries. In my opinion, economic regional integration is based in part upon the successful implementation of a regional value-added trade or value chain trade strategy. Built upon the framework of the EPA, which because of its unique characteristics calls for trade preferences both regionally as well as internationally with the European Union. We each have a country to build. Collectively, we have a region to build, one that will cause for the economic advancement of our people. Let's cause for this to happen, and let's advance our partnership together through the region. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Minister Pinder. You've touched on quite a few sensitive topics, and particularly Article 238, but I'm sure that will be open for discussion by the other panelists. The value chain approach also is one that we have been seeking to implement for a very long time, and I agree that it is an issue that we have to move on expeditiously. There's no reason why the region should have a $4 billion per year food bill. And that has doubled since 2003, when it was $2 billion. In 10 years, we've doubled our food import bill. We can feed ourselves. I believe Guyana, Belize, Jamaica, and Suriname are quite capable of feeding the region if we had a system in place that would enable us to really conduct intra-regional trade in a serious manner. So I think we have to look at things in the context of not just opening markets because people get resentful about that, but looking at our very survival as a region, because we cannot afford to continue to pay $4 billion per annum for food, the very basis of our sustenance. That being said, let me go quickly. Dr. McIntyre, are you ready for us?
Good morning, honorable ministers, Director General of CARIFORUM, ambassadors, heads of agencies, friends all. I am constrained by being an economist, so I have to talk about things economic. You excuse me for that. But when asked by my good friend and colleague Pamela Cook-Hamilton to offer some views on the whole question of the relevance of time for action, I sought to think about two essential questions. What is the world we live in today? And is time for action still relevant? What we do know about the world we live in today, and certainly the global economy we all exist in, is that it is characterized by uncertainty and volatility. Nothing is certain about the next year or the next time period ahead of us. So what we can say is that global and regional economic conditions have changed markedly from the period in which the time for action was written. Globalization as a phenomenon continues to evolve, but the world has just passed through the worst financial crisis in over 70 years. And this has given rise to a protracted global economic slowdown that has had a serious negative impact on the region. The region's tourism-dependent economies have passed through a very deep recession and are coming out of it very slowly with sluggish growth. And near-term prospects do not suggest a strong rebound to pre-crisis growth rates. In contrast, commodity prices remain buoyant, driven by robust demand from the world's emerging market economies. And the region's main commodity exporters, Belize, Guyana, Suriname, and Trinidad and Tobago, are experiencing more robust growth than the rest of the region. If we look at this chart, it's almost visible to see the collapse the Caribbean went through. That, to me, is really very stark. And if we look at where we are now, we are coming out of it very slowly. This performance in the region is reflecting the global landscape in which we live. In the world today, we have two sets of economies. We have emerging markets, big emerging markets, China and India leading the way, export-oriented Asia, Brazil, and Russia in the main. these countries are seeing very strong and robust rates of economic growth. Poverty reduction in China is taking place at an alarming rate and unprecedented levels. But at the same time we have this taking place, we also have sluggish and stagnating growth in most of the advanced economies, particularly in the United States, North America, and Europe. Nobody knows when this will change. People have perspectives on how long it may last, but nobody knows when this will change. The safest forecast is that it's not going to change anytime soon. The Caribbean has linkages with the advanced economies in Europe and North America, but it does not have strong linkages with the dynamic emerging market economies. Therefore, our near-term economic prospects are not particularly favorable. But as Pamela mentioned earlier, we cannot put our current economic circumstances solely at the doorstep of the global slowdown. Even before the crisis, a number of diagnostic reports on the region noted that growth rates had been declining since the 1990s. The Caribbean was growing slower than the rest of the world economy for many years. Time for Action drew this to the attention of the region's policymakers and provided a comprehensive strategy for taking the CARICOM countries forward and deepening their unity at the same time. Sadly, many of these recommendations are still relevant today, but disappointingly remain unimplemented. What we can say is, despite this very changed landscape, the case for regional integration among small states remains valid. Small states have very volatile rates of economic growth, high fixed costs in the provision of public goods. It's more costly for us to provide education, infrastructure, and those things than other countries. Small size of markets, which gives us diseconomies of scale. Against this background, the core elements of the development strategy in the West Indian Commission report remain relevant. The West Indian Commission report articulated an export-oriented growth strategy, and that is still the only option for small, open economies. Export diversification, producing a wider range of goods and services, is still critical to achieving a higher sustainable rate of growth and employment. Services still offers great opportunities for the region. Despite acceptance of the validity of these arguments, do we require modifications? Are there things that we should be doing differently? What could the agenda look like? I would suggest that the changed global landscape and the economic difficulties being experienced by the region now provides another opportunity for introspection and strategizing. For most countries in the Caribbean, the near-term economic objective is preserving economic stability while tackling deteriorating fiscal conditions, rising debt levels, and pressures in the financial sector. Over the medium to long term, the main goals of policymakers would seem to be reinvigorating growth, enhancing competitiveness and productivity, and providing adequate support to the poor and vulnerable groups. Regional cooperation has a very important role to play in achieving these objectives. Unlike, perhaps more relevantly today than the time when Time for Action was written, any revamped strategy of regional integration requires governments to strengthen economic and financial management at the national level. Modern economies need modern public sectors. An efficient public sector improves the government's implementation capacity at reduced cost. A strong fiscal position is required. It provides a space for governments to channel more resources to promote growth through infrastructure and the strengthening of social protection. A strong fiscal position reduces debt, which is on a drag on growth in almost all of our countries. And importantly, a strong fiscal position is needed to provide this fiscal space to support regional cooperation initiatives. It's going to be very difficult to advance an ambitious regional integration agenda with the current financial and economic circumstances in the region. We have no option but to get our collective houses in order. However, at the regional level, what could the agenda look like? First of all, we must finish the unfinished business. We need to finish the trade integration agenda with a genuine common market, free of complexity and non-transparency, and provide enhanced trading facilitating arrangements that allows producers to move goods and services throughout the region relatively efficiently. We need to establish a simple, transparent scheme for increased labor mobility. Remove the impediments to the establishment of regional enterprises. The private sector is already moving around in the region. We need to facilitate that. In other words, we need to create a common framework, a common set of simple rules and arrangements that is fully transparent and efficiently implemented. We must present ourselves to the world as a single space. In other words, if you produce or operate in any particular part of the Caribbean, you understand clearly the framework of the Caribbean, not simply the country in which you operate. That requires that we have a common policy framework. Common doesn't mean the same in every place. It just means that we have a few guiding principles and rules. Let me perhaps elaborate on that. What are some of the key areas? If we step away from integration of trade and labor markets, which we have been doing for 20 years, I'll come back to that though. What are some of the key areas? Well, regional financial regulation and supervision. We need to ensure that we understand and properly manage our financial sectors to play the important role that it does in the development of the region. Attack vulnerabilities where they exist, strengthen supervision and regulation where it is not adequate. The CLECO situation reinforces that, and we are making some efforts to do that. We need to eliminate tax competition. There's a proliferation of tax incentives, all competing for the same limited business from within the region and outside the region. We need a common framework for that. Doesn't mean that everybody must have the same corporate rate, but we could, for example, say in CARICOM, corporate tax rates don't exceed 30%, rather than that they are all 30%. There are very well-established ways of doing all of these things. But that we can't stop there. If we want to present a common framework for business, investment, production, and trade, we can't stop there. We need coordinated approaches to climate change, energy policy, alternative sources, renewable sources of energy, and for the development of service exports. In other words, finish the business of time for action, complete a genuine single market, allow the movement of labor and capital unimpeded. And the argument about the movement of labor, there are many, many models for the movement of labor that are available to us. We just need to see the one that we feel most comfortable and working with. So it's not a technical issue, it's more an issue of decision. Allow the movement of capital, and in the world today, capital is going to move. So, facilitate that and in the directions that you would like. So complete the process of market integration. But marry that with coordinated policy in key areas that are needed for growth. That provides a platform for our deeper insertion into the global economy. But it also provides a platform that national development is tied to regional development. The capacity of a country in the region, any individual country in the region, to move its trajectory of growth to a higher level is tied to deeper regional cooperation. Many of us perhaps can remain viable. We have to believe that anyway. But addressing the difficulties we have with debt, we have with unemployment and other things, requires that we have a stronger growth rate. For many years, we have seen that we are growing slower than the world. We are certainly growing slower than even the most dynamic small countries in the world, Mauritius, Malta, and others. Regional cooperation and integration is vital to lifting our growth trajectory to a higher, more sustainable rate. That, I believe, is the core long-term objective that we need. It provides for greater stability, it provides for greater social cohesion, and it secures our future. And to do that, we need to complete the decisions we've agreed to and to move towards the new areas that are vital to our future. Thank you very much.
Can I have the presentation? Thank you.